We're going to change our format a little bit now as we go into our next presentation, and this is going to be a little bit more of an interview format. So we have Mr. Jonathan Tischio here from Simons Foundation. Jonathan, are you with us? There he is. Oh, but we might have you muted.
Give me a second. I'm just getting the right camera turned on.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Huh. Well, I guess I'll just use this other webcam.
You look good.
Thanks.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us. I'm very intrigued by Simons Foundation. You guys have what I consider a noble organizational mission. Before we jump into the technology behind it, tell us just a little bit about Simons and the Flatiron Institute and what you guys are doing there.
Sure. So the Simons Foundation was founded by Marilyn and Jim Simons, I guess about 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. The foundation has a number of different arms, all of which have to do with promoting and supporting science in various forms, whether it's grant making or outreach or, you know, you name it, there's something that we're doing to support science. And then the Flatiron Institute is the in-house, we do data science and high-performance computing related to advancing basic science. We had 5 centers related to applied mathematics, astrophysics, condensed matter physics, biology, and neuroscience. And so we use various types of high-performance computing to advance those fields. It's really pretty cool and very exciting and just a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, great. What now? What does the storage end of all that look like? I know you guys have, from speaking with you earlier, tremendous amounts of data, but so tell us a little bit about the storage and how that serves your purpose and allows you to do the research, things of that nature.
Sure. So we're entirely a Unix shop, entirely Linux. So you know, unlike a lot of your customer base who have a more varied platform, we are using Linux for everything and Mac OS on the laptops. Home directories are served by GPFS. It does a fine job at that. And then our bigger sources of data are all on Ceph, which is distributed throughout this building, you know, and also with Ceph environments in some of our other locations as well. So it gives us the ability to, you know, lose a computer or lose a rack or lose a floor and still have all of our data. But as you can imagine, you know, when you've got 30 or 40 petabytes of usable data, not all of it needs to be touched all at once. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the stuff from SpectraLogic comes in.
Yeah, and you guys are in Manhattan, so when you talk about this being spread all over, Manhattan's not real big to begin with. What is that like working in that kind of environment? Well,
I mean, so what's neat is we're lucky that we've got a lot of stuff within our actual building. Mm-hmm. You know, we have some of our compute in relatively well-connected co-location facilities over the river in New Jersey. You know, it's high bandwidth, low latency, so it's you know, it works pretty well. Nobody's got any complaints about it. Plus, we've also got some stuff out at the San Diego Supercomputing Center, which has its own bank of compute and its own Ceph cluster.
Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned where Spectra comes in throughout all of that. You've actually got quite a bit of our different solution sets. You've got a T950K library, right?
Yep, as well as a Black Pearl with some expansion hanging off of it.
Okay, and I think you're playing around with one of the store cycle data mover application, or is that not out on the floor yet?
Oh yeah. So you know, initially before store cycle came out, we had been working on a lot of internally built ways of moving data onto the Black Pearl and onto the T950 for more archival purposes.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of scientists here, a lot of folks early in their career who, they're coming here to do a postdoc. By design, they're not going to be here forever, but there are reasons that you might want to retain a copy of the data in the long term, but not on your production storage. So we've been, looking at different ways to, move the data onto tape as a low-cost, low-power alternative to just expanding our storage cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And less work as well. So what had been a set of scripts and whatnot, we've now moved to using StoreCycle to pull stuff off of a specific part of our Ceph implementation. And, sort of to the user, it's seamless. We've made it at the lowest barrier to entry as possible. So people are able to simply move their data into a directory and magically it ends up on a tape.
Gotcha. So, and we're talking about petabytes of data you just mentioned. What does that user experience look like? Drill into that a little bit more. You say it
Sure.
magically goes off to tape. What happens when it comes back, or things of that nature?
Okay, so since it's pretty early in the life of the product, we haven't had a lot of use to call stuff back yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good.
You're
archiving the right stuff then.
Yeah, we're lucky in that like we're pretty early adopters of the product, and so most of our effort has been towards getting data in. For getting data out, I've done it using some of the built-into StoreCycle utilities, as well as the Eon browser that you guys supply, because pulling off of object on tape is no different than pulling off of object on disk as far as the Eon browser is concerned, and everybody knows how to use what looks like a graphical FTP client if they need it. But the getting the data in is the really interesting part, because to the user, because we're having them simply move it to a different directory structure in Ceph, it's a metadata operation for them. There's no huge overhead in moving bytes around. So to them, moving it into that directory from where it gets pulled is an instantaneous operation. Milliseconds, if you will. And then, beyond that, once they've moved it into there, they don't have to care about it, because we've already set up, based on the directory they're moving into, we've set up a bucket for them, with the appropriate permissions. And then we've got StoreCycle working on a scheduled basis to look into that directory periodically and move anything that's been there for, more than a day onto the object storage, which we've configured to put copies on tape as opposed to maintaining on disk for any long period of time.
So that sounds like a very smooth approach to migration or archiving.
Mm-hmm.
How do you back up petabytes of data, or do you back it up? What does that side look like?
You just don't.
Yeah, that's the question I had.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible, and it's a problem that I had in some of my prior lives as well. Once you scale to a certain size, you can replicate between sites for business continuity purposes, things like that. But trying to do a full backup of all of your data when you've got petabytes of data is, it's Sisyphean in nature. It's pretty much impossible. So what you do is you go, okay, how do I preserve the stuff that I have? In the event of a disaster, in the event of a business continuity event. But also you go, all right, well, how do I use snapshots with this? How do I, 90% of the time when somebody blows something up, they know within minutes. So if you can go back a little while, and help people like that, you're not worried about going to some more like long-term archival format. Our use for tape, rather than being, a traditional backup, it's very intentional. It's very like, I know that I need to keep this data, but I don't need to use it very much right now. So I want to put it over here in a place that's, uses less power, doesn't require cooling, doesn't, things like that. And so it's definitely a difference between how other organizations use tape infrastructure, compared to what we're doing.
Well, it's also interesting because we see more and more organizations coming up to these just, monumental amounts of data. And we've been talking about it for a lifetime, exponential data growth. We kind of get tired of talking about just the fact that the data is growing. Do you see, as far as what do we do with it? How do we deal with it? Do you see this type of approach as one that might become more mainstream in different areas and vertical markets as well?
Well, I think it really depends on what you do, right? So for folks that are in the financial industry or the pharmaceutical industry or something like that, they're always going to have a backup requirement because, and this is a world that I came from previously, finance. There's always going to be a backup requirement for regulatory reasons. A regulator is going to want to know, what did you do on this day? Give me everything you've got. And so for people like that, for situations like that, you're never going to get away from having some, more backup oriented way of keeping some amount of your data. But I think as things grow, you're never again going to be like, well, I'm going to do a full backup of everything I've got. I don't even know how long it would take me to do a full backup of everything I've got. I try not to think about it. Because the other problem with that becomes, if you're trying to do a full backup of everything, how long does it take, and how much of your data changes before you're done? It's not just the volume of data, but the rate of change of what you have. I think is the other thing that people forget about. Like, if you had stuff that you wrote once and that you never changed, great. So if it took you a month to do a backup, who cares? But data is constantly changing. The stuff you've got on disk is constantly being touched and manipulated. So if you want to do a backup of that, it's and it's huge, it's just not going to happen for you. But that's okay, because if you care for and feed your data correctly, if you take good care of it and you say kind things to it, you're probably not going to have to worry about restoring it all from tape.
Well, and I guess that's part of your approach, is just how you have it divided up in different areas. That's part of your data protection plan as well, correct?
Absolutely. Certainly our home directories we have replicas of and whatnot, so that if God forbid something happens, we can very quickly recover. But I think it's also a matter of setting expectations for your user community. Like, once things scale past a certain size, people need to be taught that recovery from something that goes wrong isn't instantaneous. It's not necessarily impossible, but it doesn't happen at the snap of a finger. As education.
Right. And I often ask, why did you choose Spectra? But it's kind of interesting because you didn't choose Spectra.
I didn't.
You inherited most of the solution, correct?
I inherited everything except for StoreCycle.
Okay, so the tape libraries, the hardware was already there.
Yep.
What was your experience coming into that?
Well, I mean, so I had previously mostly used stuff from your largest competitors. So
okay.
I had been familiar with your gear in a sense of, when I'm making my own purchases, what am I comparing to? What are the other things on the market? And I'd always understood that it was good stuff, but for various reasons, I had gone a different direction. But my transition to using it wasn't too bad. Like, it was pretty straightforward. Like, look, it works. At the end of the day, all on the T950 side, for instance, all tape libraries do the same thing. They've got tapes with barcodes in them. They've got some number of tape libraries. People implement the mechanical bits differently depending on their desired religious preference in engineering. But at the end of the day, it's a little robotic hand that moves around and grabs stuff and sticks it in a drive and keeps track of it for you. And look, it works. It works well. It's rock solid. And then as far as the Black Pearl, I'd used other NAS devices and other products like it. And so it does a similar set of things to those, but my transition to using it was straightforward. It wasn't hard having having a general background in storage meant that I was able to just kind of step in and use it, and I was pretty pleased with that. Certainly anytime you're using a new platform, there's a bit of trepidation going, well, how is this going to go? And it was fine. And what I do like about it is the fact that I can do regular NAS and object on the same unit is really helpful. And actually, when I first started moving data around and first started moving data to tape, I leveraged that capability. I actually used the NAS functionality of the Black Pearl as a landing area. And that worked well. But it's faster to be able to pull directly from the native storage that we're using.
Gotcha.
Because it's just one less hop.
Right. Now, we've heard some presenters earlier today talk about never using cloud. We've heard some saying they're doing hybrid cloud approach. What do you think with this amount of data and your situation, where does cloud play or not play?
Cloud's really expensive when you've got this much data.
Yeah.
And look, if you're just starting off and you don't have a whole bunch of your own compute in-house, cloud is a good use case for you. I think once you scale past a certain size, especially if you want to maintain your compute internally, cloud becomes a lot more challenging. Like I have no problem with cloud, and certainly at times in my career I have implemented stuff in AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, and look, you can do some awesome stuff in it. But I think it's, once again, like, what's your use case? And I don't see true HPC workloads ending up in the cloud anytime soon, because it's a whole lot of data, and you're beholden to somebody else in terms of what does the compute look like, what does the network tying everything together look like. And so if you're trying to do something that performs at a truly high level, I think there are some constraints that people don't necessarily love.
What do you think next is for you in storage architecture?
Well, I mean, we're pretty well settled on Ceph for our biggest bucket of storage there, and so we're obviously going to keep moving forward with that. It works really well for us. We've got a lot of background in-house with it, which is great. I don't see the general architecture changing. What I see changing is, as like the store cycle product evolves, doing things to more tightly integrate getting stuff into archive as people come and go from the organization, as projects wax and wane, basically doing things to automate that transition of data into an archival storage more seamlessly. I think that's what I think is going to be a lot of my focus going forward. But it's like, look, what we've got works and works well, so mostly like more of the same, if you will, just bigger and better.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, we're going to go to questions and see if we've had any. One came in. It looks like this is in reference when you were talking about training and training your people. Was it difficult to train individuals on the data movement via the folder you described? So,
nope, not at all, because we did it to look just like any other directory they would encounter, and that was intentional, because when we first went to do it, and I was like, well, to get into the Black Pearl, there's a Java CLI, and I can wrap some scripts around it. And I did. Actually, on my whiteboard behind me is a bunch of stuff from when I had been writing scripts on that. And, people know how to move stuff into a directory. Anybody who has any experience doing computing has moved files around. And so by choosing to do it where we're simply pulling from a directory that's on existing storage, it means that it was completely familiar to people. And I went from having to sit down with people and go, okay, well, here's how we use the clients and wrapper scripts and things like that, to just write your data over there. And it became much, much easier.
A question kind of along the same general theme is, do you allow users to restore their own data?
Right now, no. Mostly because it's very new, and people are still getting a feel for how things behave. Our
Right.
long-term goal is to make things as self-service as humanly possible. Maybe putting in something that's like, okay, you can restore up to 100 terabytes or something. Whatever the number is. Obviously, is not decided yet. But our long-term goal is for self-service, and that way, like they don't have to wait for me to get around to something. We all have a lot of stuff on our plate, and so I don't want my users to have to wait for me, to get a piece of data so they can make their next discovery.
Gotcha. All right. That finishes the questions, and we're right at time. So thank you, Jonathan, for joining us. We appreciate it. Thanks for those insights.
I was happy to be